Dubbed the queen from the Broadway stage to the heart of Hollywood, Barbra Streisand commands the world's admiration. From a nameless little girl in the poor district of Brooklyn, she rose to touch the golden Oscar statue, shattered Hollywood's harsh prejudices, and built an empire worth over $400 million, lasting 6 decades. She amazed the world not only with her talent, but also with her immense fortune. 36 studio albums, over 150 million records sold worldwide, with a steady stream of royalties still flowing. A nearly $100 million Malibu estate, an $11 million penthouse in the heart of New York, and a vintage car collection ranging from a 1926 Rolls-Royce to a 1962 Bentley S3, each piece a golden fragment of Hollywood's history, reflecting the glory of a bygone era she once represented. But what if that dazzling fortune, not just a material inheritance, but also a looming shadow and emotional burden, brought tears to the eyes of those she loved the most? What is the price of glory if it's exchanged for voids that can never be filled, silent, chilling emotional scars that never truly heal? This is not just the story of an invincible legend, but a hidden truth, an untold secret about the woman who stood beneath the dazzling lights, yet carried nameless wounds in her heart. And you, are you a fan of Funny Girl, or someone who went silent listening to The Way We Were? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Celebrities Rewind would love to hear from you. Before she ever graced the world's greatest stages, before the applause and golden awards, Barbra Streisand was just a fragile little girl in Brooklyn, unseen, unheard, unloved. It's almost inconceivable that a woman whose legacy is now worth over $400 million once drifted to sleep each night in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, her heart heavy with loneliness. Behind the empire she built, not just of wealth, but of influence and reverence, lies a childhood scarred by absence and aching silence. Those early wounds didn't just linger, they echoed in every note she would ever sing, in every role she dared to portray, as if each performance was a way to piece herself back together. Barbra Jones Streisand was born on April 24, 1942, in Brooklyn, New York, into a modest Jewish family. She was the youngest of 2 children born to Emanuel and Diana Streisand, with an older brother named Sheldon. When Barbra was just 15 months old, the universe stole her beloved father. Emanuel Streisand died suddenly at the age of 35. For years, Barbra was told a gentle lie, that he had simply worked himself to death. But the painful truth, which she only discovered as an adult, was far more haunting. He died of respiratory failure after a morphine injection was improperly administered during a seizure. He didn't pass peacefully. He was taken by a tragic medical mistake. And that mistake didn't just claim a life, it shattered the childhood of a little girl who never got to say the word daddy. There were no photos, no memories, not even a single moment she could call her own with him. All that remained were his books, tied together with string, sitting untouched in a dark cellar like the forgotten pieces of a family that once was. For Barbra, the absence of her father wasn't just physical. It was a gaping hole, one that swallowed her childhood whole. She often said, "I was the girl with the voice and no father." A child who stood out not for what she had, but for what she was missing. Years later, when she finally gathered the strength to visit her father's grave, she took a photo beside the tombstone, her arm around it, as if to finally claim the only image she'd ever have with him. That single gesture, so quiet, so personal, was drenched in decades of yearning. She recalled later that a session with a medium helped her feel her father's presence for the first time. It wasn't a performance, it wasn't a ritual. It was an aching daughter reaching through silence, just for a moment of closeness that life had denied her. But the loss didn't end with her father. In many ways, it was just the beginning. Her mother, Diana, fell into her own void, grieving, emotionally vacant, and later numbed by antidepressants. She drifted away from her children. She wasn't abusive, but perhaps worse. She was absent, even when present. She never embraced Barbra, never praised her, never told her she was loved. Love, for Diana, came in the form of food. She would drop off half a cantaloupe or a bowl of chicken soup when Barbra left home at 16. A mother's affection boiled down to nutrients and gestures, but never words. It was care without closeness, survival without warmth. As a child, Barbra didn't have a room of her own. She shared a cramped space with her mother and older brother in her grandparents' tiny Brooklyn apartment. There was no living room, no sofa, no privacy, just a cot next to her brother, and shadows cast by walls that pressed too close. She wouldn't sleep in her own bedroom until she was 16 years old. And perhaps that's why, in her adult life, she became infatuated with comfort. Sofas, spacious homes, beauty. They were the antidote to what she had never known. Then came Lou Kind, her stepfather. Barbra's mother remarried without even telling her. One day, a strange man simply appeared in her life, and he didn't welcome her. He judged her. Cold, unkind, and dismissive, Lou showed no affection. Barbra tried everything to win his approval. She fetched his slippers, crawled on the floor to avoid blocking the TV. She even called him Dad. But when asked later, "Did he like me?" Logically, Barbra's answer was heartbreaking. No, not at all. He didn't just reject her, he humiliated her, constantly comparing her to her half-sister Rosalind, calling Barbra plain, emphasizing everything she lacked. In his eyes, she was always not enough, not pretty enough, not lovable enough. It was this torrent of neglect, this emotional starvation that carved the core of Barbra's personality. Her fierce independence, her obsession with truth, her intolerance for lies, her hunger to be seen and heard after a childhood where she was invisible. Her scars weren't visible, but they were deep, lingering, etched into every note she would later sing. Barbra Streisand didn't rise from privilege. She rose from absence, the absence of comfort, protection, praise, affection. She was a child no one fought for, so she learned to fight for herself. And from that darkness, a voice emerged, not just to entertain the world, but to reclaim herself. The fortune of over $400 million Barbra Streisand left behind wasn't just made of platinum records and golden trophies. It was built on the backs of sleepless nights, shattered dreams, and moments of such agonizing loneliness that no applause could drown them out. Her rise to the top wasn't a fairy tale. It was a war against prejudice, doubt, and an industry that never made space for a woman like her. From her very first steps onto New York's smoky nightclub stages, she carried more than talent. She carried defiance, daring to sing boldly in a world that mocked her nose, her heritage, her very presence. She had no formal training, no rich connections, only a voice that refused to be silenced, and a dream that clung to her through rejection after rejection. She was brutally dismissed, told she was too Jewish, too weird, too unpolished. But she persisted. In 1964, she stunned Broadway in Funny Girl Fanny Brice into a feminist icon. The performance earned her a Tony nomination, and 4 years later, in 1968, she brought the role to the big screen, winning an Academy Award for Best Actress. The film grossed over $58 million worldwide, a massive success for the time. It wasn't just financial success. It was vindication. But while the world cheered, Barbra remembered. My mother never once told me she was proud of me. Not once. She didn't stop there. She starred in comedies like What's Up, Doc? 1972, which became one of the highest-grossing films of the year with $66 million, and musicals like Hello, Dolly, 1969, which, despite mixed reviews, earned over $33 million. Each role masked a deeper truth. She was still fighting to be seen beyond the scripts. In 1973, her haunting performance in The Way We Were grossed over $50 million and carved open hearts, yet the ache of her own isolation lingered behind the camera. I still felt like I was proving my worth every single day, she recalled in her memoir. In 1976, she gave the world A Star Is Born, pouring her soul into the music, co-writing Evergreen, which won her a second Oscar. The film earned over $80 million globally. The recognition was sweet, but it came with the bitter taste of battles fought silently. Her deepest scars formed behind the scenes. Her dream to direct Yentl was met with a decade of closed doors. Studios couldn't fathom trusting a woman with that much control. 14 years of no nearly broke her, but she pressed on. When it finally debuted in 1983, it became a milestone, not just for women in film, but for every person told they couldn't. The film grossed nearly $40 million worldwide. Yet even then, the Academy didn't nominate her for Best Director. That snub hurt more than I admitted, she later confessed. Not because I wanted the award, but because it meant they still didn't see me. Even greater acclaim came with The Prince of Tides, 1991, 7 Oscar nominations, and a box office return of $110 million. But once again, her direction went unrecognized. She returned in 1996 with The Mirror Has Two Faces, earning $41 million, a story of late-blooming love and self-worth that mirrored her own inner battles. But still, she remained haunted by what she called the glass ceiling covered in velvet. In music, she became something no one expected: eternal. Her 1980 album, Guilty, a collaboration with Barry Gibb, became her best-selling studio album with over 15 million copies sold globally. Hits like Woman in Love echoed across generations. Her duets, You Don't Bring Me Flowers with Neil Diamond and No More Tears with Donna Summer, weren't just chart toppers, they were lifelines to a public that felt her pain, her joy, her truth. She's the only artist with a '1 album in every decade from the 1960s to 2010, with timeless works like the Broadway album, 1985, Back to Broadway, 1993, Partners, 2014, and Walls, 2018. Each success was hard-won. Her music catalog sold over 150 million records worldwide, not because she chased trends, but because she poured herself into every lyric, even when her voice trembled. But tragedy struck where the world least expected, in the very space that once gave her wings. During a 1967 concert in Central Park in front of over 135,000 people, Barbra forgot the lyrics mid-performance. That one agonizing moment, watched by thousands, judged by millions, scarred her so deeply she wouldn't sing live again for 27 years. The silence inside me screamed louder than the applause, she confessed in her memoir. It wasn't just fear. It was shame, paralyzing, cruel, unrelenting. For decades, stage fright became her prison, and behind every platinum record was a woman who could no longer face the thing she loved most. Not because she didn't want to, but because the pain had built walls even her voice couldn't break. In 2023, Barbra Streisand released the long-awaited memoir, My Name is Barbra, a heartfelt, unflinching account of her extraordinary journey. The book became a New York Times bestseller, offering an intimate look at the emotional weight she carried: childhood wounds, crippling stage fright, and the constant fight to be taken seriously in a male-dominated industry. "I sang to be seen," she wrote. "But sometimes, after the applause, I felt invisible." With those words, she gave voice to generations who have felt unseen, even in their brightest moments. That same year, she also released Evergreens, celebrating 6 decades on Columbia Records, a curated collection of 22 songs, one from each of her studio albums. It wasn't just a musical retrospective, it was a living archive of her evolution, each note a thread in the fabric of her legacy. And in a quiet but poignant announcement, Barbra confirmed what many had long suspected: she would never tour again. For fans across the world, it marked the end of an era, but it also deepened the reverence for every stage she once graced. In 2024, the Screen Actors Guild bestowed upon her the SAG Life Achievement Award, honoring not just her remarkable body of work, but the decades of courage, vision, and resilience she gave to the world. It was more than a tribute. It was an acknowledgement from an industry that, for too long, underestimated her power. In the end, they didn't just recognize her artistry, they honored her as a force that redefined what was possible. Barbra Streisand is no longer just a performer. She is a voice, a symbol, a legacy. And though the spotlight may grow softer, the echo of her courage will resonate through generations. Yet after all the stage lights faded, after the endless standing ovations and prestigious awards, what haunted Barbra Streisand the most was not the struggles of fame, but the emptiness that applause could never reach. Barbra had it all: fame, power, admiration. But it was in the simplest of human experiences, marriage and motherhood, where she faced her deepest wounds. In 1963, she married actor Elliot Gould, the only safe haven she had back when she was still battling through auditions, dimly lit stages, and endless criticism about her looks. It wasn't a marriage forged in glamour, but one built by 2 lonely souls who found solace in each other in a world that hadn't yet recognized their worth. In 1966, Jason Gould was born, and with him, a new chapter began in Barbra's life: motherhood. But the cruel irony was that just as she embraced that sacred role, the height of fame came calling. Barbra stood at a crossroads. One path led to the career she had always dreamed of, the other to the innocent eyes of her son, waiting for his mother to return from never-ending tours. "I wasn't there for my son the way I wanted to be," she once admitted, voice trembling in a rare interview. "And there are wounds I'm still trying to heal." With grueling filming schedules, sleepless recording nights, and award ceremonies, Barbra missed countless moments a mother should cherish. She wasn't there on Jason's first day of school. She couldn't tuck him in at night or attend his school events. Years later, Jason confessed, "I grew up with a mother the world adored, but sometimes I just wanted her to be mine." His words were like a dagger to the heart of a woman who had traded so much to be seen in a world ruled by men. And so, as the distance grew, cracks formed in Barbra and Elliot's marriage. Once pillars of strength for each other, they became strangers under the same roof. Barbra buried herself in work to escape the pain of feeling like a failed wife and mother, while Elliot silently endured the feeling of being left behind. In 1971, they quietly divorced. No dramatic public battles, just a quiet, sorrowful end. She rarely spoke of the pain, but the fractures never fully healed in a heart that had always yearned for lasting love. Then, as Jason grew into adulthood, he came out as gay, a moment that, in many families of the time, could have built an unbridgeable divide. But Barbra, a woman who had always been judged for being different, never feared it. She wrapped her son in love without hesitation. "I love my son as I love myself. Nothing can change that," she declared to the press, even as silent prejudice still lingered in Hollywood. And she didn't stop there. Barbra became a fierce advocate for the LGBTQ+ community, not for attention, but for her son and for the brokenness she had endured all her life. Jason once shared, "Maybe my mother wasn't there for every moment, but she never left my heart. Her love, whether quiet or fierce, was irreplaceable." Amid a glittering career, million-dollar mansions, and shelves of awards, the most precious thing Barbra Streisand ever held on to was her son's heart. A heart once wounded, once lost, but ultimately healed by a love that was brave, enduring, and deeper than any spotlight Hollywood could ever shine. Barbra Streisand's first marriage ended not with scandal or spectacle, but with a quiet ache, one that never fully healed. It left behind more than the pain of a woman who had lost her family. It carved a hollow space in the heart of someone who had always yearned to be truly seen, truly loved. And in those loneliest days, on the set of Funny Girl, she met Omar Sharif. Not just a co-star, but a fleeting kind of destiny. Between the scripted lines were glances heavy with unspoken empathy. Between takes, there were silences so tender they ached. The way Omar looked at Barbra, gently, without judgment, made her feel, perhaps for the first time, like she wasn't a star, a symbol, or a headline. She was simply a woman. They loved in silence, in the danger of prejudice, when the very idea of a Jewish woman loving an Arab man was enough to set Hollywood ablaze. And when their private photos were leaked, scandal exploded, pushing them into the brutal spotlight of condemnation. But to Barbra, that love was real, more real than any ovation on stage, more real than any praise under the spotlight. "For the first time in my life, I felt desired, not for being famous, but for being me," she would later confess, eyes clouded with the knowing sadness of someone who had already seen the ending. And that ending, inevitable as it was, came. Omar left, taking with him a piece of Barbra's heart. It was a love story never fully written, but never erased either. A fleeting chapter that would echo through a lifetime. After Omar Sharif, Barbra's heart seemed to have closed for good. But in the late 1960s, she met Pierre Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. He wasn't an artist, but there was something in him that brought Barbra peace, maturity, intellect, and eyes that truly listened. They connected deeply over conversations about philosophy, politics, and loneliness. Barbra once said, "He understood me, in a very quiet way." But both of them lived under lights that were too bright. Neither could walk away from their role to hold on to the other. And so, they parted, gently, without blame, like two souls who understood that some people come into our lives only to fill a void, not to stay forever. And then, in a different chapter of her life, when fame had already wrapped itself around her name, Barbra unexpectedly found herself enamored with Don Johnson, a rising television star who was youthful, free-spirited, and made her feel as if she were reliving her youth once more. They were like two worlds colliding. She, a symbol of resilience forged through countless storms. He, a blazing fire in the showbiz landscape of the 1980s. Evening strolls under dim streetlights, spontaneous recording sessions together. It all seemed to herald the beginning of a new love story. But behind the camera flashes lay differences that could not be erased, conflicting schedules, a significant age gap, and relentless public scrutiny that suffocated the love, trying to bloom. Barbra tried to slow down to hold on to a man, But she soon realized that some loves are born only to light up a moment, not to warm an entire journey. When they parted, she didn't cry in public, but in a rare moment of vulnerability, she quietly said, "I had hoped it would be different, but not every love stays, no matter how deeply you feel it." And then, just when Barbra's heart seemed too weary after so many heartbreaks, fate led her to someone completely unexpected. Andre Agassi, the tennis legend nearly 2 decades her junior. An unlikely pair, they somehow found each other amidst the overwhelming noise of the world. Barbra, the proud icon of the arts, and Andre, a young man bursting with youth and passion. She once joked, "I called him my youth vitamin." But behind the laughter were glances filled with worry. The generational gap, the relentless media scrutiny, the harsh judgments about their age difference, all became invisible blades, chipping away at the fragile trust they tried so hard to build. Barbra loved Andre with a sincere, gentle kind of love, as if she were trying to protect a missing piece of herself. But that love was as delicate as a freshly tuned string, beautiful, mesmerizing, yet quick to snap under too much strain. When they parted, no words of blame were exchanged. Andre later admitted, "She made me feel heard and unconditionally loved." And Barbra? She quietly moved on once again, hiding her wounds behind those eyes that had longed for love and too often had to let it go. After the deep wounds of her first marriage and a series of passionate yet fragile romances, Barbra Streisand's heart seemed to have stopped believing in the words, forever. She had lived her life in the spotlight, admired by the world, but when the curtains closed, she didn't have a shoulder that truly belonged to her. Then, in 1996, at the age of 54, Barbra met James Brolin. He wasn't a man who swept her off her feet, but one who brought her peace. In James's eyes, there was no curiosity, no judgment, only a quiet understanding, as if he could see the hidden scars she carried without ever pressing on them. 2 years later, they married. It wasn't a lavish wedding meant to dazzle the press, but a silent promise between two souls who had known loss. Since then, they've lived together, quietly and steadfastly, as a testament that true love doesn't need a stage, nor lights, nor the world's applause. It just needs each other. Barbra once said the thing she loved most about James wasn't his fame, but that he knows when to be quiet and just listen. In a world where everyone fights to be heard, James chose to take a step back, so Barbra could simply be herself, without the need to put on armor. They didn't have children together, but Barbra embraced James's son, Josh Brolin, as if he were a natural part of her life. That grace, that love, never needed a spotlight, but it was deep enough to bind a once fragmented family through kindness and trust. No marriage is perfect, but in over 2 decades together, Barbra and James have done what so few Hollywood couples manage: preserve respect. No scandals, no noise. Just quiet mornings tending to their garden, evening walks under the Malibu sunset, and glances at one another as if it were still their first. Barbra once said, "It took me years to believe that a love without sacrifice could exist. And then I met James." In James Brolin, Barbra didn't find a perfect half. She found a companion peaceful enough to fill the voids she had walked through alone for so long. This wasn't a fairy tale, it was real, simple, profound, and long enough to turn scars into something quietly beautiful. In her twilight years, what truly makes Barbra Streisand wealthy isn't the millions of dollars on paper, but the spaces she built with her own hands, sanctuaries where she tucked away sorrow, revived memories, and healed wounds the world would never see. In Malibu, where sunlight stretches over rose gardens and koi ponds, lies the vast estate with 3 separate houses where she lives with James Brolin. Its value may approach $100 million, but to Barbra, it was never a dazzling castle. It's home. It's where she held a simple wedding with the man who chose to stay. It's where she once had to evacuate in haste when wildfires raged, only to return because nowhere else on earth made her feel so deeply that she belonged. There are no standing ovations here, no spotlight, just birdsong, ocean breeze, and the silent gaze of a man who knows when to say nothing so she can be herself. The vintage townhouse on the Upper East Side, worth $17.5 million, holds a different sliver of her past. Built in the 1930s, it was the first home she owned after winning her first Oscar, a place where a girl who once squeezed into a shabby Brooklyn apartment could finally shut the door, look into the mirror, and whisper to herself, "I no longer need to ask anyone for anything." And then there's the penthouse on Central Park West, valued at $11.25 million. Proof that even a legend needs a quiet corner to gaze upon the city that taught her how to rise, how to love, and how to endure unspeakable loss. It's a cocoon in the sky where she could play classical music and let her tears fall unnoticed. The vintage cars she's preserved for decades aren't there just for display either. The 1962 Bentley S3, with its polished wood interiors and velvet-smooth ride, recalls those first days stepping out of Broadway, caught between newfound fame and the looming fear of being forgotten. The 1976 Mercedes-Benz 450 SL, sporty, bold, mirrors her emergence in the era of A Star Is Born, a Yantl who refused to bend to convention. And the 1926 Rolls-Royce, not for flaunting, but as an artifact, stands as proof that style is the one thing you cannot imitate if you live authentically enough. Every brick, every cent of leather in the car cabins, every crack along the doorstep is a relic of a journey not made to grow rich, but to remain whole. Because this woman, before she had everything, once had nothing. No father, no recognition, no gentle hand waiting behind the curtain. And perhaps that's why the true legacy Barbra Streisand leaves behind isn't in her mansions or multi-million-dollar classic cars, but in the whisper of a soul that once shattered, once lost its way, yet still found the courage to build a kingdom, not from gold or silver, but from memory, resolve, and unshakable pride. For Barbra Streisand, the most valuable thing she leaves behind for the world may not be the voice that once silenced Broadway or the films that defined an era, but a quiet, enduring legacy built from the compassion of a heart that has been broken, yet never stopped wanting to heal the world. In 1986, she founded the Streisand Foundation, not to polish her name, but as a bridge of kindness connecting forgotten corners of humanity. Over the decades, more than 1,000 grants have been issued, channeling tens of millions of dollars into causes the world often overlooks: environmental protection, civil rights, women's health, and equitable access to voting. It wasn't by accident. It was a conscious, deliberate choice. Especially her commitment to women's heart health has transformed not just lives, but the very course of medicine. In 2008, Barbra donated a significant sum to establish the Women's Heart Center at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, because she knew women in medicine were too often reduced to statistical afterthoughts. From that first contribution, she went on to donate and raise millions more. Not for praise, but so that women could live longer, be heard, and be healed properly. But Barbra's legacy isn't measured in numbers. It lives in culture, in the way she dared to speak up when all of Hollywood stayed silent. She stood with the LGBTQ+ community when stigma was rampant, spoke out against racial injustice, and funded legal organizations protecting those society pushed to the margins. Barbra didn't just give, she researched, listened, and helped others find their own voices. From a research institute at UCLA, committed to justice and climate change, to direct grants reaching communities in need, her vision wasn't just vast, it was intimate enough to reach individuals. A patient receiving free treatment, a student granted a scholarship, or an activist once fighting alone who suddenly felt a quiet hand of support. In Hollywood, legacies often end in courtroom battles, shattered families, and irreparable cracks. But Barbra Streisand never lived by the scripts others wrote. From her voice to her love, and even to the way she prepares for her final departure, she has always lived looking forward, not just for her career, but for the soul of what she leaves behind. Though her will remains private, the shape of her legacy is already coming into view. Her only son, Jason Gould, whom she has loved unconditionally, will likely carry the torch of artistry. The stepchildren she embraced as her own may not only carry memories, but perhaps the weight of stewardship. And the Streisand Foundation, which has touched thousands of hearts, will continue to beat, like a part of her body, even when that body is no longer here. Because the true inheritance of a legend doesn't lie in mansions, golden statues, or million-dollar investments. It lives in the way she prepared to give, with thoughtfulness, with love, and with the unwavering belief that greatness is not in what you keep for yourself, but in what you leave behind for others, when you're no longer here to prove it. Today, at the age of 83, Barbra Streisand no longer stands under the stage lights, but she continues to shine in another way, in the quiet serenity of her Malibu home, in the warm love she shares with James Brolin, and in the enduring values she has quietly given throughout her life. Barbra no longer needs another hit song or another award to prove herself, because her legacy already lives silently in the hearts of millions. And now, as the curtain falls, we don't just look at the wealth she leaves behind, but at the battles she fought so bravely to earn every precious thing in her life. The empire called Streisand wasn't built from gold or platinum, but from resilience, from the steadfast heart of a little girl who once had nothing, except a voice that never grew tired. If at any moment in your life a Barbra Streisand song made you pause, comforted you through sorrow, or helped you believe in love again, leave a tribute below as a way of saying thank you to this extraordinary woman. Barbra is not just an artist. She is a symbol of courage, of timeless beauty, and of a deep, enduring love for life. Do you have a memory tied to her music? Is there a song that touched your heart? We invite you to share it. With your words, we can help write the final chapter of a legend. Not with applause, but with heartfelt love from every soul she's ever reached.